given the circumstances under which I speak now, it's difficult to predict 5 days or 5 weeks ahead, let alone 5 years. Given the scale of the impact of the pandemic, not only on our own region, but on the world, on the balance of power, on internal European dynamics, on international dynamics, on the implications for China, for the United States, it's very speculative to look down the road and point to possibilities. But nevertheless, I would say that there are certain aspects that have been established in recent years, looking back, I'd say more 5 than 10, the last 5 years in particular, that have changed the dynamics of the Eastern Mediterranean in a very dramatic fashion. And I believe that these changes, despite the level of uncertainty that we are living through, I believe that these changes will have an impact down the road for the foreseeable future. The most significant element, I believe, is the emergence of a framework of strategic commonality. I think the term alliance is premature, at least, or overstated, but I could definitely speak of an alignment of a structural framework that now reflects a commonality of interest that is embodied specifically in the EMGF. But the EMGF goes well beyond the G. That's to say, it's not just the Eastern Mediterranean Gas Forum. There are other aspects that clearly underlie the emergence of what could be called, if you wish, the 3 plus 3.5, because the Palestinian participant, the 7th energy minister attending the EMGF meetings, does not represent a fully sovereign state as yet. We shall have to see whether the Trump initiative or other developments take us in that direction within the 5-year space. I would raise a question mark here, but at least the present situation under which the PA is a functional national entity on its way to becoming a state will probably be with us for the next 5 years. So we have a 3 plus 3.5, Italy, Greece and Cyprus, Egypt, Israel, Jordan and the Palestinian Authority coming together on much more than simply cooperating on energy. And ironically, I'm not quite sure that within these 5 years we shall see the realization of the gas pipeline, which was originally, let's say, the trigger for the emergence of this common organization, a common body. Given the very serious impact, if you wish, of the pandemic and other factors like Russian-Saudi rivalry on energy prices, the economic feasibility of a major infrastructure project may come into question. What will not come into question is the need for the 7 participants to closely cooperate on energy. Jordan has already committed itself to be dependent on Israeli gas. Egypt has signed a major agreement. Cyprus, Egypt, and Israel will need to find ways to cooperate in one format or the other in bringing their product to market. Palestinian dependence on Israel is almost a given for the foreseeable future. And even without a pipeline, ways can be found to enable Greece and Italy to not only enjoy and benefit, but also serve as a conduit for energy going to European markets. So this is whether the pipeline is built or not, the energy cooperation dimension of this, I think, is going to be with us for the next few years. But it goes well beyond that. We all know what is at stake. namely the challenge posed by a key player. In other words, Erdogan's Turkey, and I'm saying specifically Erdogan's Turkey because its ambitions, its conduct, its audacity, as we see, for example, in the claims for a common EEZ border with the putative government of Libya, its intervention, its large-scale intervention in Syria, which seems to be outlining a degree of territorial expansion unprecedented since the fall of the Ottoman Empire. All of this is very much marked by the personal characteristics, the ideological drives that are typical of the AKP government. I'm not saying that other Turkish governments have been, how shall I put it carefully, vegetarian, not in 1974 and not on other occasions, but this goes beyond the scope of traditional Turkish nationalism. This is, as many people have coined this, a form of neo-Ottomanism. And this will be the key challenge of the next few years in the Eastern Mediterranean. It is very much the underlying agenda for the EMGF participants, and very much the test of what's coming may become much earlier than 2025, namely whether or not Erdogan and his client in Tripoli, the Sarraj government, can actually try to implement their notions of how the Eastern Mediterranean can be carved up. Now, given the scope of Turkish entanglements across the region, the current tensions with Russia, which came to the edge of war over Idlib, the complexity of their relations with other neighbors, internal tensions in Turkey itself, the growing sense of not only the traditional Kemalist elite, but also of people who come from within AKP's fold, historically speaking, that Erdogan is taking the country a few steps too far. All of these may come into play within the next months and years, and hopefully, we cannot be certain of that, but hopefully would curb the scope of these of the present aggressive pursuit of neo-Ottomanist ambitions. Much will depend in that context upon a country that most of us tend to take for granted as a country as being very much in the grip of its own internal difficulties, its own internal dynamics, namely Egypt. But Egypt has taken a fairly firm stand in the face of the Turkish Tripolitanian. This is, after all, the government of national accord is a government of national discord. There is no unified Libyan government. The LNA is stronger probably in the battlefield. This is why Turkey has threatened to intervene militarily. So the Egyptians have taken a very firm stand in support of the LNA, in support of a solution in Libya that would not service Turkish ambitions. They have even threatened to bring their own military influence to bear, particularly in terms of preventing arms supplies to the GNA and the Misratawis in the ongoing armed conflict there. So we may face very dramatic developments, but I believe that if we try to predict a situation 5 years from now, and on the assumption that one way or the other, Italy will put its house in order. Right now, it's heartbreaking and it's very difficult to predict that this could happen. But that too shall pass, as the old Persian saying goes. And if the country comes together under a leadership determined to consolidate its role in the Eastern Mediterranean, in conjunction with the other EMGF partners, and if Egypt sustains internal stability, resolves its Ethiopian issue, which the Americans are working hard to bring about, sustains a close cooperation with Israel, as is the case right now, and takes an active role in ensuring that the Libyan situation develops according to what we commonly see as our interest, then all of this may ultimately lead to a situation where the salience, the profile of the neo-Ottoman challenge will be actually reduced, and the consequences of overambition will come home to Ankara in political terms, and may even bring about, one hopes, a change either in leadership or at least in the style of leadership. So I believe that given what most of us in the Eastern Mediterranean have in common, and given that there is leadership willing to respond to challenges, and with this Libyan situation being the touchstone of who is going to end up having the upper hand, I'm cautiously optimistic. It's going to be conflictual. It's going to be complicated. I hope it doesn't come to blows, because nobody wants to think too far about the consequences of a confrontation. But if others in Europe, well, it's of limited relevance, but in the United States also take a firm stand in this respect, I believe that the challenge can be contained, and 5 years from now we would be in a more stable and potentially cooperative situation compared to the current conflictual framework. One last point that needs to be brought into consideration, although once again it's shrouded in uncertainty, has to do with the role of China, the People's Republic of China, and specifically the role of the Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI, in the Eastern Mediterranean. We all know that the United States administration, certainly the present one, and in all likelihood, whoever gets elected, will continue to look upon China as a rival, as a strategic threat. And specifically, we've heard from Washington again and again that they look upon the BRI as part of this zero-sum game perception. So they were very critical and quite aggressive at some points about Israel and other countries associating with aspects of the BRI, such as the Chinese role in the port of Haifa. Of course, there is already a major Chinese role in the port of Piraeus, up the Adriatic in the Italian ports, etc. But I would say that to the extent that the BRI marks out Egypt, certainly, and the Eastern Mediterranean as an important part of China's new strategic reach, and if this helps stabilize and empower the Egyptian government, the Egyptian administration in keeping the country together and playing a strategic role in the region, then it is in our interest collectively, the EMGF countries, the Eastern Mediterranean alignment, to have a complex conversation with both Washington and Beijing ultimately recognizing and respecting the centrality of the United States for our futures. As it happens, we are countries with a deep strategic connection, and for some of us, a deep diasporic connection to the United States. But still, I think we can have a conversation about how Chinese contributions can be brought to bear in an intelligent way that helps us and does not harm American interests. And if that happens, I think we should also see, once we emerge from the present crisis, a constructive, not necessarily a problematic element being added to the Eastern Mediterranean equation.